This episode of Gators Breakdown is brought to you by Shark Coatings. Visit sharkfloorcoatings.com when you need professional floor coating services done right the first time.
Want more Gators Breakdown? Join Gators Breakdown Plus. Starting at $3 a month, get access to unique episodes, plus a blog, chat room, giveaways, shout-outs, and more. Gators Breakdown Plus is furthering the interaction with fans and listeners like you. Head to gatorsbreakdown.supportingcast.fm to join Gators Breakdown Plus today. Gators Breakdown. Because there's never a dull moment in Gator Nation.
The Gators Breakdown podcast is ready to go. I'm your host, David Waters. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. Coming at you Monday night, Monday after Florida gets taken down by Tennessee. Joining me for this episode is co-host Will Miles. You can find him on Twitter at WillMilesSEC and his site Read and Reaction. Will, man, we made him sweat at the end. It may not have looked like it was going to be one of those dramatic endings for Florida Tennessee, but we get the dramatic ending. Florida falls just short, but it looked like it was well out of hand. Looked like Tennessee was kind of getting comfortable, enjoying themselves in Neyland Stadium, but. No, we made them sweat one more time, and they come out on the top, come out on top this time.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's glass half full, glass half empty type stuff, right? I mean,
Yeah.
You see the Richardson performance and go, okay, that's what we think we can get. Now we just have to be more consistent. You see the defense and you go, oh boy, there's a lot of work to do. You see the fourth down calls and the 2-point conversion calls, which we'll get into, and go, well, that's interesting. And then you see a Tennessee team that was really primed to have this sort of performance. Obviously, the second year in Heupel's system. Hooker comes over from Virginia Tech. He was good at Virginia Tech. He's been great at Tennessee. He's going to be gone next year, and so this was their shot, right? This was their opportunity. And I think, again, it goes back to that glass half full, glass half empty. You never like to lose to Tennessee, but it's the second time it's happened in the last 18 years. Every once in a while, you're going to lose. In a rebuilding year, to lose to them for it to only be by 5 points. And really, before the Richardson fumble, Florida was right there, considering that they couldn't stop anybody. I don't really know. Napier after the game said there's no moral victories. That was one of the things in the title of my article as well. There are no moral victories, right? I mean, you got to actually win the game when you get to that position. But there's a lot to come out of this game with where you say there's something to build on. And I think that's encouraging for anybody who's a Florida fan, that there is that baseline. If they'd have gone out and gotten beaten by 45 and Richardson had looked like he did against Kentucky,
Yeah.
I mean, it would be such a different vibe, even though the record is the exact same, right? And so all the different things that have sort of lined up, I think lead us to be encouraging. It was a fun game, even though Florida lost. And so now the question is, can you build on that and improve on that moving forward? Or do you end up being the team you've kind of been the first 4 games of the year, where you're really, really inconsistent week to week? And if that's the case, well, then everybody who picked them at 6-6 may end up being right, and you've got really no shot against Georgia. But if you can build, well, now all of a sudden, that you're going to have opportunities in some of these games where maybe we'd penciled in an L, and, there might be an opportunity to steal 1 or 2 against some better teams. So, look, I mean, we knew coming into the season that Florida wasn't going to win a national championship. We knew they probably weren't going to win the SEC East. Those are both pretty much out the window now that they're 0-2 in the East against 2 folks or 2 teams are going to be in front of them. But there's still stuff to play for. And I think the biggest thing to play for at this point is 6-6 at least. Get into that bowl game, get those extra practices, and figure out what you have at different positions, right? And so we started that process, I think, in this Tennessee game. I think there are some people in this Tennessee game who played who are going to be big parts of what Billy Napier builds on. I think there are going to be people in this Tennessee game who are not going to be parts of what Billy Napier builds on. And, it's important to find that out. And you'd rather find it out in a season where you're probably not going to win anything than find it out, in a shoe game against LSU in 2020, right? And I think that's going to be the key, is 3 years from now that the discipline is there, as opposed to sort of weeding that out right at this point.
Yeah, well, and the early season schedule has been really difficult. Kind of the theme of this episode, or something we'll discuss this episode. 2-2 for the Gators. with it has been the hardest schedule in the country so far. And you look at the AP poll, of course, look, maybe not the best barometer, but one of the only barometers we have to go by so far. And look, you're smart enough out there as college football fans to know these teams Florida has played so far and how good. Are these teams elite? No, absolutely not. They're not Alabama. They're not Georgia level. And I've kind of said it going into this season. And, Will, I think I even said it, on your preseason the week before the season started. I was like, behind the top 3-4 teams in the country, it's a crapshoot. I mean, anybody from 4 to 40 in any kind of rankings, it's any given Saturday, I think is probably a way to put it right there. But right now, you look at the AP poll, Florida has, lost to number 7, Kentucky, and number 8, Tennessee. Beat number 12, Utah. 3 out of the 4 games, top 15 teams right there. Is it going to stay that way? Probably not. But at this, going into the second month of the schedule, Florida's had 4 games, the toughest 4 game out of any college football program out there, all while in the transition, all while the first-year head coach is figuring out his team, the team's figuring out him, they're figuring out all this along the way. And 2-2, I think you ask a lot of people, a lot of people would have predicted that. Some people were even predicting 1-3. Some people were predicting 3-1, 4-0 if you were on the optimistic side. Then you play Utah, get that win. Then the 3-1 and 4-0 really came to the forefront of people's minds. But here we are, sitting at 2-2, toughest schedule in the country so far. It does ease up, Will. It really does ease up, and I think this has got to be a building block for Florida. You've got to take all these lessons you've learned from playing the hardest schedule in the country so far, and go and out there. And we don't need one of those fall back down the competition performances versus Eastern Washington and Missouri as well. Florida's better than Missouri this year. There's no shame in saying that, even through the first month of the season. But we've known struggles versus Missouri lately. We know last year happened as well, and weird things happen when Florida plays Missouri. But that's a team, with the way Florida is playing, you'd like to go out there. And if you play the way on offense that you are capable of playing, that we saw versus Utah, that we saw versus Tennessee, you win that Missouri game. Now, you go to the other side of the ball, and you may keep Missouri in that ball game. So, well, I think, looking at it, especially for offense, you build off of that performance versus Tennessee. You take that and you build on it. You've got to take these 4 games and try and take some lessons out of the defensive side of the ball. And we'll get into that a bit too. Billy Napier has some things to say about that. But this first month of the season, Will, I question and I wonder how much will it benefit Florida coming up.
Yeah, well, you got to give it to Billy Napier. He definitely makes sure everybody stays for all 4 quarters. That's for sure. I mean, the last couple of years at Louisiana had something like 16 or 17 one-score games. Every game this year's been a 1-score game. I know Kentucky won by 10, but that's because they handed them a field goal at the end after going forward on 4th down. So every one of them has been, a play here, a play there, and all of a sudden the game goes in a different direction. So to your point, the team could be 4-0. The team could also be 0-4. I think 2-2 is right. Right. I mean, you look at it, you say, 2-2 is right for the way they've played. They've been outscored this year. You look at their offensive and defensive points predicted points added or EPA or any of that sort of stuff. They would be below average in the SEC, both offense and defense. Though, again, you got to factor in strength of schedule, I think, when you compare it, because otherwise you'd be like, oh, they're right there with Vanderbilt in terms of those statistics. But those statistics matter, and they have been so inconsistent on both sides of the ball, right? I mean, the defense plays pretty well against Kentucky, though Napier still doesn't trust the defense. And then against Tennessee, they can't stop anybody, can't stop USF, can't stop Utah. The offense looks great against Utah, great against Tennessee, terrible against Kentucky and USF. The special teams have been spotty, especially bringing out kickoffs for, in situations where you wouldn't think they would bring them out. And even then getting holding penalties and getting pinned back an awful lot.
And Napier mentioned that too, by the way, since we have sound from him, I'm kind of limited to how much I'm supposed to use, and he brought it up. They're working on it, but they want to get those game-changing plays. So we'll see. Well,
look, I think that this Florida team last year was probably the most inconsistent team I can remember, because something new cropped up every week that bit them in the butt. And the game that they would lose one game, we'd be like, okay, we learned this about the team. And then the next week something else would go wrong, and we'd be like, wait, we thought we had that fixed. And then the next week something else would crop up. You'd be like, wait a minute, like,
I mean, yeah, the not being able to stop the counter didn't really come about till you went to LSU, which is almost midpoint of the season.
well, and so I think what Napier's dealing with is some of the stuff that is residual from that, which is that there's just a level of inconsistency with the guys who are returning, and you got to build that consistency and that discipline and that day after day do your job type stuff into everybody while also learning, right? And I think that's one of the things we also need to acknowledge is Napier and his staff are all learning the SEC landscape, and what that looks like with a lot of young players. And it hasn't been pretty all the time, hasn't been ugly all the time either. I think, look, they were 10.5-point underdogs. I think most people expected them, including myself, that they were going to go into Tennessee and get beat by 2 touchdowns, and they didn't. I think that game was a lot closer than even when they were behind by 17. I think we all felt like, the fumble by Richardson then gets converted into a touchdown the other way. We're like, oh, they were so close to pulling it. Well, probably to within 4, because he would have gone for 2 after he got that touchdown. But
I mean, the difference, Will, was right before halftime, right after halftime. I mean, that was the difference.
Well, that's been the difference in a lot of the games, right? I mean, the interception against Kentucky right before they went in for the half, the pick 6 against USF sort of gave them a cushion that allowed them to carry that one home going into the half. And then you've got this one where they were at midfield with like 3.5, 4 minutes left, pin them at the 1. But it was interesting to me at the 50. If you were going to quibble with one thing with Napier, I think it would be the play calling at the 50 on that particular drive, that they did not give the ball to Montrell Johnson or ETN there when they were at midfield with 3.5 minutes left, if for no other reason, because then you're kicking back to Tennessee with even less time than you have on it before. There was a Richardson missed Pearsall, I think, on a throw where he was open, but it was a tough throw. And then they had a couple of plays that ran a little bit of clock. But that to me is the one place where you look at it and go, should they have maybe been a little bit more conservative, or should they have leaned on the running game, even though it was struggling? Should they have leaned on the running game? Should they have leaned on Richardson running the ball there in the last 2 or 3 minutes of the half to keep it away from Tennessee? Go in, even if you're up 14-10, even if you don't drive down the field and get a field goal and go up 17-10, or drive all the way down and go in 21-10. That's maybe the one place where I say, like they were aggressive the entire time. Should they have maybe dialed it back right there?
Yeah, that was interesting there. Right before, that was pretty much the difference in the game. If things play out the way they actually did, a lot of those 4th down decisions and going for it and all that stuff. You can change those. You can not change those, but that right before halftime, I think, was a clear difference in the game. So, all right, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button if you're watching this live on YouTube right now. Whoever you are, hit that like button. Really, really helps us out here on Gators Breakdown. Plenty to get into on this episode. Plenty on Gators Breakdown Plus as well. During the football season, you get extra episodes, Q&A episodes there with me throughout the week, chatting on that Discord server each and every day. A lot of good conversation going on there as well. And before we move forward out there, be safe, Floridians out there with this big hurricane on the way. If you're on the west side of Florida, take all the precautions you can. I work on the news at a news station. We're taking all the precautions here on the East Coast, here in Florida. We won't get the brunt of it as you guys will on the West Coast. So I got friends in Tampa who are being evacuated by tomorrow morning. So if you're in that area, heed the warnings. Go be safe. And we'll see you afterwards, and hopefully everything's okay there. So everybody just be safe out there coming up this week. But let's get back to some football here. Well, and some positives, some more positives. Like you said, it's not moral victory, but there are some things we can take away from it. And one thing I do want to take away, how about the team showing up on the road? Because that was a big question last year. We all remember last year's team. First game on the road, Lexington, look completely unprepared to play a football game. Then later on in the season, the debacle in Columbia, South Carolina, later in the season where the team just wasn't ready, got boat raced by, not so good, maybe average at best South Carolina team. And this team with a new staff did not look like they were playing with a new staff on the road. They were there. They were prepared. You didn't get some of the dumb penalties. The staff didn't look like they were playing their first game on the road in that type of environment. Florida didn't work themselves out of a game because of the inexcusable penalties, lack of preparation. The offense handled that environment very well. And I know some will point to the defense and maybe say lack of preparation there, but that's just purely getting beat. Besides a couple plays, of course. But as Napier said, a lack of execution there. I don't think a lack of preparation when you look at the big picture. There were inexcusable lapses. I'm not excusing those, but there was effort. There was no quit in this team. Just went up against an offense that's really, really good. But the whole team competed well all the way to the very end. But I just like, going on the road. I didn't know what to expect. Honestly, this was a new staff. And we know Billy Napier for his reputation is to be prepared for every scenario. And, they didn't, you cannot tell that, this was their first road, three straight home games to start the season. First road game in that type of environment. I was at least happy to take that to us. We'll take that with us to the next step.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you'd have told me that Anthony Richardson was going to throw for 453 yards, average 10.3 yards per attempt, and run the ball 17 times, I would have told you, that guy's getting a nice bath at the end of the game. And I would have said Florida wins. Because if now I would have said it's a track beat, I would have been like, but at the same time, like those are stats where you're like, whoa, he hasn't done that all year. He hasn't done that in his career, right? I mean, he put the team on his back and just carried them for large stretches. His usage rate was up around 70% for the entire game. They clearly knew that they needed to get him back right, get him in the right frame of mind. They gave him some easy throws to start with, which I thought was good. But the other thing is that if you went back and looked at the Kentucky tape, when he was not pressured, so that I had a stat in my preview article for Tennessee that when he was not pressured against Utah and when he was not pressured against South Florida, he was really, really effective. He was not effective against Kentucky. And so he went back to that. When he was not pressured, when there was a throw that just needed to be made to either Whittemore or Pearsall right over the middle, sometimes it was low and the guy had to kind of go get it, but he didn't airmail it by 15 yards, which is what he had been doing. And so hitting those nice, easy, over the middle throws made the defense start to constrict a little bit. And when it did, he started to hit those throws to the outside to Shorter and to Pearsall and was really on target with a lot of those things. I can only think of maybe one or two throws where he really was off after that first quarter. And once he settled in, then it was like, okay, now we really have an opportunity. Florida got some turnovers early. Obviously, the fumble from Ventrell Miller was a huge play in terms of keeping him in the game. But I tweeted at the end of the first quarter is that it felt like the Georgia game from last year where Florida was clearly the inferior team. They were able to move the ball a little bit on the Bulldogs. They got in field goal territory, missed a field goal. I think Georgia missed a couple of field goals. It was still 0-0, but you're like, this can't last. And then the turnover barrage happened at the end of the half. And what happened was after the first quarter, Florida was really able to right the ship and take it to Tennessee. And look, I don't think anybody thinks the Vols defense is on the level of Georgia or Alabama or anything like that, but they've been pretty good against the run all year and continued to be good against the run in this one, which is why Richardson had to take over. So, I think, they came ready to play on the road. I think you would hope that 4 games into the era of a new coach, he hasn't lost the locker room to a point where he's going to be able to get him to show up on the road and have a good game plan and those sorts of things. I think the big thing is that there were a lot of times where they could have packed it in, right? Where and in fact, I think Danielson even mentioned it on the telecast where they gave up the big play, the 70-yard pass on the broken coverage right after they'd gotten up 7-3. And just like that, 2 seconds later, Tennessee's up 10-7. And he's like, you just worked so hard to get to 7-3. And now Tennessee just bam, bam, right down the field. And so the fact that the offense kept going back in the field, kept fighting, kept giving the defense an opportunity to then screw it up on the back end, I think says something about the team, says something about their togetherness, and says something about where they may be going heading on from here. So great performance by Richardson. I got to be honest, I'm a little bit curious to see what happens when he goes back into the swamp because he's had all of his best performances on the road. That LSU game, this kind of reminded me of that, right? Where it's like, hey, here you go, AR, just roll the ball out there, chuck it all over the place. We're going to let you go after it, and hey, you'll make a mistake here or there, but we're going to live with it because the offense is dynamic when you're able to just go out there and be you. That's what this kind of reminded me of. And those two performances, his signature performances thus far as a Gator, have both been on the road. And we're going to have to figure out how to get that at home there in Gainesville, because that was an exciting player to watch.
There we go. We figured it out, Will. When the team comes running out of the tunnel, all the Gator fans should just boo. Maybe they get more comfortable there.
He can shush everybody like Frank's back in 2018.
There we go. Hey, we're trying what we can. But yeah, that goes to another point, Will, and that gets us kind of to AR at the same time. To be able to adjust not running the ball. I mean, that is something Billy Napier prides himself on and prides his offense on, is going out there and being able to run the ball, being able to dictate with the offensive line and the running game, and kind of just take over a game eventually with that. And it wasn't there. And Tennessee did a great job with that. And you needed Anthony Richardson to go out there and perform. So Billy Napier, credit to him too, being able to adjust. I'll go and look at it. Not too many times he has a quarterback that throws it 40 times. So when you want to go back and look at it, but yeah, credit to him for being able to adjust, having to adjust and being able to adjust. And have success that with a quarterback that we were all questioning coming into the game. And here's Billy Napier on Anthony Richardson.
We knew going into the park that we were going to give him the ball and let him go play. We'll continue to do that. It's just part of him being a young player. No different than you draft an NFL quarterback, in the first round, and hey, he's your guy. Let's go. There's been a number of rookie quarterbacks that have been through that same process, if that makes sense. So, I think the big thing for him is I saw him kind of flip the switch as a competitor, and really just get consumed with, hey, look, this is my team. I'm going to take my team. We're going to beat your team. I'm going to do everything I can do to help my teammates and help our team win, and just competing, right, and not really worrying about anything else, what anybody thinks or, how things are going. Just like, what is the next decision that I need to make to help the team win? And I think ultimately that's where I saw a little bit of growth from him.
Some growth, Will. And look, I think even going back to, to Kentucky and the USF games, he was struggling. And quarterback depth may have something to do with this, but man, they were letting Anthony Richardson go out there and just work it all out, especially in that Kentucky game. Billy Napier trusted him, probably could have put it back up in at any moment, at any time, to maybe even just settle him down for a drive or two. But no, Billy Napier stuck with this guy and trust him. And look, 35 attempts versus Kentucky, 41 versus Tennessee. There are your two SEC teams you played so far. And the teams you're 0-2 against as well. So, man, I don't know if there's correlation much there yet. We'll see where the season goes. But the 41 versus Tennessee, of course, comes with territory of fighting behind a bit late in the game in the fourth quarter as well. But at least the ability was there. He had the ability to keep it going and to bring Florida back there at the end of the game. And look, I often said, going by Billy Napier's history, I thought he might open it up a bit more with Richardson than he showed in his pass with Levi Lewis. From everything I was hearing in Gainesville throughout the fall, Billy Napier really likes and really trusts what he has in Anthony Richardson, and that Kentucky performance was just a complete surprise there. So now, look, not going to be every game because Florida has. Because of what Florida has in the run game and the ability to be able to run the ball. Now, I know that this past week wasn't there, but more often than not, the run game is going to be there and be leaned on by Billy Napier. Of course, versus Kentucky, thought they could lean on a little bit more to help out a struggling quarterback, but Billy Napier was there trusting his quarterback. But Tennessee, it was needed to stay in the game. Now, Will, just whether it's out of necessity or not, I think Napier sees a quarterback that he sees talent in and a quarterback he trusts. And he trusted Levi Lewis too back at Louisiana, but not to the tune of letting passes fly like crazy. So I went back and looked, and last year Levi Lewis threw 40 attempts versus Texas in the opener last season, but his next highest was 34. He averaged 28 attempts last season. 2020 threw for 37 as the highest versus Georgia State that year and averaged 27 attempts in 2020. In his first year as a starter in 2019, threw for 39 in the opener versus Mississippi State, 46 versus App State, both losses, averaged 27 that season. So there's not many times he even threw over 30 there, Levi Lewis. So right now, Anthony Richardson is at 30 through the season, through 4 games. So I think, moving forward, how much does Napier let AR throw? How much does he need to throw versus Tennessee? Of course, it was needed. Run game was shut down. It was the only way Florida could stay in the game. I expect Florida to be able to run the ball moving forward. And maybe even AR himself, more than we saw versus Kentucky, more than we saw versus USF. But, Will, at the same time, you look at this Florida defense, and I expect some shootouts to be coming up on the schedule as well. So, we're going to need some successful, maybe 40 attempt games from Anthony Richardson, maybe a few more times this season.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see, right? I mean, I think in this game, you kind of they knew they were going to need Richardson in order to win. They knew they were going to be in a shootout. They knew clearly Napier knew going forward on fourth down in his own territory, going forward on fourth down 6 separate times. He knew he needed to keep the Tennessee offense off the field, and he didn't really trust his defense to be able to stop them, which also explains some of the conversion stuff later on. And he was right, because Hendon Hooker averaged 12.5 yards an attempt, and so that's obviously bad. I think, though, one of the things is you've now established Anthony Richardson's confidence, and if you're looking at this from a long range, then you got to start asking, who else do we need to get ready, right? Who else needs that confidence? Who else needs those reps? Who else do we need to get ready? Not the quarterback position, but elsewhere. And so I do wonder, especially with Eastern Washington, Missouri coming up on the schedule, are we going to start to see some of the younger receivers, a guy like Caleb Douglas? Are we going to see Arliss Boardingham if he's healthy? Are we going to see Chiakow? Yeah, Marcus Burke, Dejon Reynolds, Chiakow Bowman. Are we going to start to see those guys get more time? And if those guys are getting more time, then obviously Richardson's going to be the guy who's throwing it to them. But I do think that they're probably going to back off on the 17 rushes. I think the 17 rushes were, hey, he needs to get popped a little bit. He believes that he needs – and I think this really is true. I think Anthony Richardson believes he needs to be running and free in order to be effective. And, they were able to give him that in the Tennessee game. I don't know that you'll need to do that moving forward, at least not initially, because he got confidence as the game went on. And all of a sudden, the ball was being zipped into those zones, and they were perfect passes. And so now that you've got that, let him do it, right? Yeah. And let him do that. Let your running game take over against lesser opponents, and go out and show Richardson he can do this game after game after game with just his arm, so that you don't have to run him all the time. Allow guys like ETN, guys like Montrell Johnson to get comfortable with where they're going to be in the offense, and then go out there and get some younger receivers some run as well. And sort of build those guys up. And I think that's one of the things that's going to be sort of a story for the year for the offense, is that I suspect that there's going to be opportunities to build different guys up in different games. And this Tennessee game was an opportunity to build up Anthony Richardson, because one, he needed it. And then two, Florida needed it for him to be for them to be successful. I don't know that they're going to need that from now on. And in fact, again, if you go back and look at the Kentucky tape, it wasn't like he was making the wrong read most of the time. Now, there were a couple interceptions and things like that where you look at it and go, okay, that wasn't the best read in the world. But for the most part, he was making the wrong read. He wasn't delivering the ball well. It was high consistently. He was overthrowing guys. There were a couple. There was one to shorter early on I think it was a third down, where they went down the sideline, and I didn't like the play call. I thought they were getting aggressive in a way that made it low percentage, and there were maybe some opportunities to take something shorter across the middle. But those are things that actually I think I pointed this out in my recap article is. On the last drive, Richardson could have tried to push the ball down the field. He actually took a check down at one point on one of the plays to Bowman, and I thought that was telling, right? That he looked around, he didn't have his guy who was open. Tennessee had dropped a bunch of guys into the zone, and he realized last second that he had a check down. He throws it out there, they gain 12 yards, and then keep moving. I think we're going to see that a lot more. I'm hoping we see that a lot more, because against USF, there were a lot of times where the check down was available and he didn't take it. The fact that he took it in a critical situation where they only have a limited number of seconds left, and they need to score that touchdown at the end, the fact that he was willing to take it there, I think says something about his development, and says something about how these guys are going to start developing with him as we move forward.
Yeah, 41. It was 41 attempts, Will. Right? Well, what was it? I was trying to remember off the top of my head. Let me see. I got it right here.
It was 44 attempts.
44 attempts. Yeah. 44 attempts. And I don't remember. And you said going back to the Kentucky, and it was the reads were there, but some bad throws, and of course the pick six and all that. Out of those 44 attempts, I don't remember digging my hands into the couch and being like, "Oh no, don't throw that one." They're like, I don't remember that. I mean, I could be misremembering there, but I was just like, oh man, that was a terrible throw, or shouldn't have thrown that, or he got lucky that one didn't get picked off. There's been times this year where there's even been those throws in combination with the interceptions. But I mean, he dropped back 44 times, only completed 24, of course, but part of that, I think, where he was hurried 13 times according to the official stats, and also he threw some of the passes away, threw them out of bounds there. So there was some, as you're saying, Will, even with the checkdowns, and then throwing the ball out of bounds as well, not taking the sack, getting rid of the ball. I mean, it was also a smarter performance by Anthony Richardson.
You're not going to see a better play than the one on the touchdown pass to Zipper. Like that, the amount of machinations he had to do in the pocket. He actually had an opportunity to leak out the backside and run and probably gain 6, 7, 8 yards. And at the last second, he comes back to his right and he just sort of like flipped his wrist. And most guys flip their wrist like that. And I think it was a linebacker, maybe it was a corner, but the linebacker who was in front in that sort of covered, they had like a cover 2 shell on that side, who's in front, like just didn't have time to adjust. And I'm like, that's why Mel Kiper, that's why Todd McShay have this guy sitting where he is. He's incredibly raw. But that play right there, I just look at it and I go, his base was way off. He was moving all over the place because Florida's offensive line was beat right from the start of that play. He was looking left the entire time, then all of a sudden comes back right and just throws a bullet without his base underneath him right at Zipper. And obviously Zipper did some special stuff after he caught the ball. But the fact that even got to Zipper, I think says a lot about Anthony Richardson and his skills and abilities. Now, obviously it has to be that way consistently. You can't just do that once. You have to do that every single time. And I think that's going to be the challenge for Richardson is how do you get more consistent? Because he's had a couple of pretty decent highs. The Utah game, he won that game. The Tennessee game, he had them on his back. But the Kentucky game, they were trying to carry him, and he just would not let them. And the USF game was sort of still bad. And so, it's not just like you can't just be on every other game or one out of every 2. But it was interesting coming into this game in my preview article for Tennessee. I did mention, I was like, what if Utah and Kentucky had been flipped? So what if he'd put up an absolute stink bomb in the first game and then he'd played really well against Utah and then he'd been ho-hum against USF? We would have been like, well, he's due to come back, right, and have another good game. And the order flipped, which meant it felt like everything was going down. But now he's got an up. And the question that he has to answer is he going to be up 1 out of every 3? Is he going to be up 2 out of every 4? Is he going to be up 6 out of every 8? And then can he eliminate the down?
Right. And I'm not trying to make the comparison to Bryce Young at Alabama, but and I brought this up, with the Texas game. He has his struggles, but he finds a way to win, and he finds a way to flip the switch in the fourth quarter and go on with a victory. He doesn't have. You go back to last year's LSU game and last year's Auburn game for Alabama. Bryce Young did not play all that well, but he knows when to turn it on. He can flip the switch and he can go out there and get the victory. It's not like he's out there throwing for 350 yards every game. He still shows his struggles at the same time. Look, I'm not comparing that, but I'm maybe just the kind of comparing the up and downs, that might be, something you can look at.
Well, and I did this in an article a couple of weeks ago where I compared him to Burrow. And they have a different statistical profile in high school. And look, I don't think that Richardson's going to be as polished as Joe Burrow was in 2019, probably at any time in the near future. But the point was that Burrow was really up and down that first year. I mean, everybody remembers every Florida fan remembers that pick 6 against Florida to end that game. He also had a pick 6 against UCF where he just got absolutely blasted by one of the defensive linemen who came over and hit him. And, so it's not as though he didn't make mistakes, and it's not as though he didn't show inconsistencies that first year. And in fact, he was really inconsistent, and really, actually, he wasn't that inconsistent. He was consistently bad for the first 8 or 9 games of the year. And then all of a sudden a switch flipped. And so again, I think that's the question that needs to be answered here is, did Richardson just flip a switch? And are we going to see this moving forward? And Eastern Washington actually gives him a good opportunity to sort of build 2 in a row, because you would expect that this is a game where he's going to be able to go out there and continue what he just built on against Tennessee. At the same time, we said that about USF, and that turned out not to be true. So we'll see, right? Is he a sine wave? Is he up and down and up and down and up and down? or is he going to be able to start stringing together a couple of these ups in a row? And I think, honestly, Richardson's one of the most gifted players I've ever seen who plays quarterback. But just because you're gifted doesn't mean that you're good. And so he's been very good in 2 games. He's been very bad in 2 games. I actually kind of want to see him play well, or what I want to see him do is I want to see him right a ship in the middle of the game when you know he doesn't have it. Like when he airmails a guy in the middle of the field, is he going to go, oh, here we go again? And all of a sudden we're back to going 4 of 12 for 33 yards and the offense can't move? Or does he airmail the guy in the middle of the field, and the next time that throw is there, he lets it rip and he gets it there and it's complete? And that, I think, is probably the next step for him when it comes to being quarterback. Is the Tennessee game after the first quarter, there were a couple things in the first quarter, but after the first quarter, everything went his way. Like, and admittedly, because he did it, right? I mean, he's rearing back and ripping it, and the ball's getting there, and it's right on the spot. But to your point, he didn't make that one throw over the middle that was ill-advised that got picked. Gets taken the other way, and then everything sort of snowballs from there. So we'll see, right? I think that's going to be the test for Richardson. The next test for Richardson coming up is there's going to be a game where he's going to throw an interception because he's prone to them. He's going to throw an interception at some point early in the game. The question is going to be, can he come back out and have the confidence to continue letting it rip? I think this game is part of that. I think this is part of building that process. But again, we don't really know how he's wired. This game, he played well from the jump. The Utah game, he played well from the jump. The Kentucky game and the USF game, he didn't really play all that well right from the start. And the minute a mistake was made, things started to go downhill. And that'll be sort of the next step, I think, for him, is to prove to himself, more so than to us, that when he makes a mistake, he's able to right the ship mid-game.
Yep, that's the thing Florida needs to build on most, sitting at 2-2. But that performance versus Tennessee is something hopefully the quarterback can build on. So, all right, we'll hear more from Billy Napier coming up here in Gators Breakdown for him discussing the secondary and also his use of analytics. But first, hear from our friends at Shark Coatings.
You know the goosebumps you get when Florida takes the field? Or when that 63-yard Hail Mary actually works? Or the thrill of a game-winning interception in the end zone? What a rush! You can experience that same rush every day at your home with Shark Coatings. We'll cover your old, ugly concrete with a beautiful industrial concrete coating and a warranty that lasts longer than most careers in professional football. So whether your garage floor is for parking, partying, or working out, Shark Coatings can transform it. And if your pool deck is starting to look like a bulldog, old, cracked, and smells like pee, Shark Coatings can transform that too. Shark Coatings is easy to clean, stain resistant, and is 100% antibacterial and antimicrobial. We're easy on the eyes and on the maintenance. Gator Nation is worldwide, and Shark Coatings is based right in the heart of it. So whether you live in Brunswick, Georgia, or Live Oak, Florida, down to Ocala, over to New Smyrna Beach, or anywhere in between, contact us for a free estimate today. Learn more at sharkfloorcoatings.com. That's sharkfloorcoatings.com.
All right, here we go. Let's switch it to defense now. And Billy Napier discussing, after he was asked about safety, secondary play for the Gators coming off the game versus Tennessee.
There's 2 in particular where we just have one player bust the coverage, right? And I think there is a communication element to that, but a lot of it has to do with discipline to execute, the ability to do your job in a critical moment, in a critical time, right? We've got to do the simple things well, right? There's, a dozen plays in that game where Florida beats Florida, if that makes sense, and we've always taken great pride in being a team that doesn't give the opponent anything. Right, you're going to have to earn every inch that you get when you play our team. So we're still not there, right? We're still learning our systems. We're still learning how to adjust to playing different systems. I think there's a lot of repetition and growth and that needs to take place there to get to be the type of football team that we want to be.
Well, I mean, he's telling the truth there. This defense, of course, the whole team, not a well-oiled machine. Definitely going to need the reps out there. And, through 4 games so far, 3 from the defense have left a lot to be desired. But one thing I thought we could hang our hat on, Will, going into this Tennessee game was there were not those big busts that we had been accustomed to seeing the last couple of years. You didn't see the wide-open player running down the field. And then lo and behold, Tennessee can stress you now. They can put you in those situations where you better be able to communicate. You better be in the right. You better be in the right sets. You better be you better be making your key, reading your keys. We heard about that all off season coming into this, and of course, Billy Napier starts that soundbite off right there, talking about two plays in particular. And Will, you stressed it in your article. Of course, we all the first big bust there, Trey Dean in position, and just for whatever can clearly tell it's man there on the left side of the offensive formation, but it was the top of the screen. For whatever reason, just does not cover the inside receiver. He goes down wide open, big play for Tennessee. And then later in the game, of course, there may be some more question at who is responsible, whether it be cornerback Avery Helm or Trey Dean. And once again, Billy Napier says soundbite didn't necessarily really clear it up. It did sound like one player, maybe even the same player on both plays, but that still really wasn't clear. Was it just one player on each play? So no clarity there. He's not going to come out and name anybody in particular there. But still, even going back to the first one, inexcusable kind of play there, Will. And one, I was just hoping we were through 3 games. We didn't see that type of play yet. But coming up on the road in Knoxville versus an offense that will test you to see if you are going to avoid that. We saw it twice.
Yeah, well, credit to Tennessee. They hit it every time. The Todd Grantham defense was notorious for letting guys get behind him. The opposing quarterback couldn't always take advantage, but in this case, they could. Look, I mean, those are the ones that you look at and say, absolutely, like they can't happen. They're unacceptable. I think Gary Danielson used that phraseology on the broadcast that's just an unacceptable bust. But here's the deal. Florida gave up 576 yards, averaged 8.2 yards per play against. They gave up 12.5 yards per throw, 5.4 yards per rush. So they got beat. And whether you want to blame it on the 2 plays that, one, like you said, is Dean. The second one we kind of suspect is Dean, though it depends, again, on what defense was called. And without knowing what defense is called, you can't definitively say whose responsibility it is. I actually think based on what the other 3 guys did, I'm kind of leaning Helm, but I don't know. But the thing is, that's 2 explosive plays. There were 4 other ones. That 44-yard run for Hooker, that had nothing to do with Trey Dean.
Right.
and the pass that was dropped by their tight end across the middle when they had Trevez Johnson playing like 18 yards off of him and didn't drop a linebacker back into the center of the field. Everybody knew that was going to the tight end across the middle. It was an easy slant, easy pitch and catch. Tennessee misses it. It's like, whoa, holy moly! Like how did they miss that one? You've got the pass to Keaton there at the end of the first half, the 43-yard pass where he lays out. I mean, it's a great catch, right? Really, really good throw and catch. But part of the problem is that they clearly declared to Hooker before the snap that this is what you've got. Right. And so there wasn't much disguise. He knew he was going to have one-on-one on the outside. He knew he was going to have an opportunity to take a shot. They're at their own 22. They've just gotten a first down. You took a timeout. You know they're going to have to take a shot at some point in the not too distant future. That is the time to play prevent, right? Like there are times where prevent prevents you from winning. There are times where prevent actually like helps you keep things in front of you. And they decided not to do that there. So look, anytime you give up almost 600 yards, anytime you're giving up 8 yards a clip, you can point to 1 or 2 busts. Certainly those are disturbing and you don't like seeing them. And, look, I mean, even those old Oklahoma teams that we used to make fun of for not playing any defense. I mean, I don't recall them having just busts. I mean, sometimes they got beat physically, but I don't recall them having like just bust after bust after bust. But I mean, look, Florida couldn't get Hooker on the ground at any point the entire game. They gave up over 100 yards rushing to him. They gave up 350 some odd yards passing to him. They can't get off the field, which is the other aspect that we haven't really talked about at all. And I haven't heard a lot of people talking about. Florida has now given up 26 of 50 on third downs this year. They've been up above 50% in 3 of the 4 games. The only game they were decent was against Kentucky. They've given up 52% total third down conversions, 50% overall if you count fourth down conversions, and Tennessee was 6-9. So, Trey Dean had nothing to do with third down conversions. I mean, he had something to do with it, but he wasn't the reason that Tennessee was converting third down after third down after third down. He wasn't the reason that Utah was converting third down after third down after third down. He wasn't the reason USF was converting third down after third down after third down. This is a defense where Napier even mentioned it in the press conference, where every play there's somebody who's not necessarily doing their job. And they're going to have to fix that, right? And it's glaring when it's a 70-yard pass And look, that needs to be fixed too. I mean, I'm not making an excuse. What I'm saying is that the 40-yard run for Hooker, but even like there was a play where they had the linebacker didn't get out to chase the running back.
Right.
Clearly, it's the linebacker's man, right? They motion out the running back. The linebacker doesn't move. They throw a swing pass.
Shamar James, I think it was.
Shamar James. And the linebacker doesn't move. They throw it out there on a little swing pass. Tennessee blocks it pretty decently, and Rashad Torrance has to come from 25 yards away to go tackle, 14 yards downfield. It's like, I mean, that poor guy is going to lead the team in tackles because he's the only guy left. Like,
did you? You probably didn't get a chance to listen to Gators Breakdown yesterday. And I'll put it just in case you didn't listen yesterday. I went and tracked down. He had 13 tackles for the game. Here was the yardage gain on those tackles. 21, 9, 16, 10, 70, 1, 19, 16, 16, 45, 6, 8, and 11. I mean, as you said,
8. There was one first down.
I mean, so that lets you know, as you said, it's like you're getting past the first level, you're getting past the second level, and you got your safety who's having to make it up. And don't get me wrong, his tackle numbers are high mostly because of that. It's not like he's an in the box, third linebacker safety and Marcel Harris type from back in the day. He's not that type of safety. He's making these tackles down the field.
Yeah, well, so there's a bunch of different things there. But if you stop the running game, then you don't have to. Then your linebackers and your safeties don't have their eyes in the backfield because they know they have to come up and support. So this all cascades from the defensive line. And McClellan needs to play a lot more. The last 2 games, he's really flashed, and I expect to see him a lot more. But look, the defensive line doesn't have anybody up there who's making a game-changing play. The
one tackle for Brenton Cox, one tackle for Jervon Dexter.
Well, and I mean, again, the last play, I think it was the inside run for Tennessee that they put the last touchdown up. It's one where Cox is going after the quarterback. He's supposed to be making a read, doesn't crash down on the running back. There's nobody there on the back end to help. And, look, it's not just Cox's fault, but it's an aggregate, right? You look there and go, all right, who's getting pressure on Hooker? When you get the pressure on Hooker, are you able to bring him down? They had him at middle linebacker at one point on that third down there late in the half, and they put him there specifically because we think we can get him there to the quarterback in a critical situation. That's why they called the timeout, because they thought they had the play to get him, and they didn't get him down. It didn't get him on the ground. He broke through the offensive line. He had him dead to rights. He gets away, and all of a sudden there's a first down for Tennessee. And, there are multiple plays on each drive where you look at it and just say, one guy didn't do what he needed to do. One guy wasn't physically gifted enough to do what they were asking him to do. One guy broke the coverage. One guy did what he was supposed to do and wasn't able to execute at the end. And then every once in a while, one guy just had no idea what the heck he was supposed to do. and so you string all those things together and you end up, you can play
against the good offense, because, Tennessee, if people say, the middle of the field was wide open, that's what they do. That is their offense. So you have to win up front.
Yeah. Well, and you got to win at something, right? And I think that's the thing that we've really learned over the first 4 games for Florida's defense is, I had pinned some hope on their secondary because it was actually pretty good against the pass last year. I don't know why that was. I think it's because they were so bad against the run that offenses just decided, we'll just run for 9 yards a pop on the ground and be okay with that. And so we're not going to go torch them because they've been bad through the air this year as well. But you got to be good at something, right? I mean, are you good at coverage? Are you good at man-to-man? Are you good at zone? Are you good at, do your linebackers move side to side really well? Do you stop the run and have your run fits? Do you get pressure up the middle? Do you have defensive ends who can get sacks? Like, what is it that this defense does well?
And after first couple games, I probably would have said got pressure, because they got pressure versus Utah, but Cam Rising escaped it, was able to make some plays. Kind of the same thing versus Kentucky. They were able to get some pressure, especially early in the game. This one kind of too, but they had to use some blitzers, and they had to, it was up the middle a lot in the first half of how they got pressure on Hooker. So I thought it probably would have been able to point to getting pressure, but no, as I said, the way Tennessee's offense is, you have to win up front, and it just was not there.
Well, and it's the same thing we've been talking about now for, it seems like, a decade, which is pressure is not just a guy coming off the edge. Pressure is a guy up front pushing the offensive lineman back into the quarterback. And if you look at the play that
turn it around, how many times did that happen to
Well, that's what I was about to say.
Yeah.
Like, he completely changed his path on the running play where he fumbled the ball because I think it was Egwukan got just blasted back in behind the line of scrimmage. And now you're left with a situation where Richardson has to change direction. He's a little bit off kilter. The ball pops out and you get a fumble. It's not just the play that caused the fumble wasn't the guy who hit Richardson. The play that caused the fumble was the thing that made him divert from what the play was intended to do. You get a guy going up the middle in Hooker's face, he's going to throw a ball up that's inaccurate. In fact, he threw it inaccurate a few times, even when Florida didn't have somebody in his face. Like, there's an opportunity there if you can get that pressure up the middle. They just aren't able to do it right now. And part of that is that poor Javon Dexter's being triple teamed a lot of the time. Some of that is that, I love Desmond Watson, but he's not the guy who's going to get pressure up the middle, at least not right now.
Right.
Human Milan and Boone and those guys are spotty. That every once in a while they'll break through. They had a play where they blitzed both James and Miller on the exact same play, and they were bringing 6 against 5 and somehow didn't have a free rusher. Like, how did you have 6 against 5 and you didn't get a free rusher? Like, Miller got caught up in traffic, and it was they didn't get to Hooker, and all of a sudden it's a slant and they end up with a first down. So those sorts of things, there's some of that stuff that can be fixed. Some of it is just, it is who they are, right? They don't do anything well right now. And if you were going to ask me, what do they need to do the rest of the year? I think that's the thing they need to do. They need to figure out what their identity is on defense. Is the identity going to be, we're going to play man and you figure it out? Like, we're going to have some guys get burned, but we're going to play man to man because we want to be a man-to-man team, and we're going to blitz the crap out of you because we know we can't get pressure. And hey, every once in a while we'll drop into zone, but for the most part, we're coming after you. Is it going to be, hey, we're going to be the best zone defense in the country, and you're going to know that when you're facing us, you're going to have to be precise. You're going to have to go down the field. You're not going to get anything big because we're constantly doing that. It's a bend but don't break. Yeah, you'll be on the field. Yeah, you'll have a lot of third down conversions, but we're going to prevent you from getting the big play, because the hybrid of going back and forth means you have no identity, means you don't know. Means you have these sorts of breakdowns, and quite honestly, against teams like Missouri, against teams like even LSU, but against teams like Eastern Washington, you should be able to go out there and play what you want to play and dominate the opposition. If you can't, then I think we got to be worried. But look, I mean, this is a team that gave up 50 points to Samford last year.
Yeah.
So it's not as though the defense was a bunch of world beaters last year. And some of that is stuff that needs to get fixed. But like I said, if I was going to focus on one thing as Patrick Toney, but what do I want my identity to be? And then let's go out and work on that. And, we're going to give up some points. We're going to give up some yards. We're going to do all that sort of stuff. But what do I want the identity to be? Let's build into that. And then as we bring in more talent, as we spend more time in the system, as the guys learn what they're supposed to do, and quite honestly, as some of the guys who can't fit that identity get weeded out, well, now all of a sudden you've got a defense that gets better and better and better as the season progresses.
Yeah, maybe a youth movement along the way. So, all right, we'll end this episode on another hot button topic here the last couple of days. If you're in Gator Nation, and that is the 2-point conversion Billy Napier goes for when it was. But you want to be down 9, 10, or 11, all that comes into the equation here. But let's hear from Billy Napier and his reasoning why.
First of all, you start talking about playing for a tie, right? When you're on the road, there's a slight advantage for the home team in overtime, right? And then there's certainly a bigger advantage when you're a 2-score favorite, right? I think it's about around 63% advantage if you're the home team playing overtime and you're a 2-point favorite or a 2-score favorite. So that goes into your decision making, and really all you're trying to do is declare the path earlier in the game, right? So you go for 2 there, and if you get it, you're at 9. Okay, now you're in position to win the game with an extra point. Whereas if you don't get it, now you're still 2 scores with an additional opportunity to go for 2, right? So if you kick it, ultimately, the numbers are going to tell you to go for 2 to win the game anyway at the end of the game, right? So you're just declaring the path quicker, and then that gives you a chance to adjust your strategy the rest of the game. I've got no issue with the decision. I mean, heck, we tip our own pass or we get the 2-point conversion, right? So, I mean, we got the right play. We made the right decision, I mean, this is one of those paths you go down where you know, a lot of people don't understand, but, you know, we're going to base our decision making off of, you know, research and evidence and true facts, you know, and numbers. So it is what it is.
It is what it is, Will, and I love it. Take the emotion completely out of it. We're going by research. We're going by facts. we're you know, look, and this is all going back to analytics, of course. There's, you know, charts that say when you score, how much you're down by, and this is what you do to go for the win. And that's what Billy Napier is going to go by. So, look, that is all laid out there now. Everybody will – you can still second guess it, I guess, but you're going to know why certain things and certain decisions are made, whether it be fourth downs or in this case, 2-point conversions. But you know now that this coach is going to rely on analytics. He's going to be aggressive with it. He's going to trust it. Going to take all the emotion out of it, Will. And granted, there will be times, I guess, you know, it's probably not going to be 100% of the time an analytical call. But for the most part, and especially in that situation where, as he said, he laid it out pretty good. You're the road team, and you're down. You're double-digit underdogs. You don't want to go to overtime. You don't want to go to overtime in that hostile environment. Billy Napier was going for the win in his mind.
Yeah, well, so I think there's a couple of things you said there. I think the 2-point conversion decision does have something to do with who you're playing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so let's reverse the order. If Florida had come down, kicked an extra point the first time, then had kicked a field goal, and then had scored a touchdown at the end of the game and is down by 1, and he goes for 2 points, like, what do you want as a fan? Like, would you have wanted him to go for 2, considering that Florida hasn't stopped Tennessee the entire game? Like, in an overtime battle, Florida's at a significant disadvantage. I don't think anybody disputes that. Is it 25-75? Is it 10-90? Is it 40-60? I don't know, right? But Florida's at a significant disadvantage. Napier actually went into that in the press conference, right? That historically teams that are 2-touchdown favorites on the road win like 63% of the time in overtime, something like that. So you're an underdog if you go to overtime. So all he's really doing by taking that 2-point conversion early is, and he said this specifically, I think he even said in the clip you showed, is he's charting the path. It allows him to make optimized decisions moving forward because he already knows whether he got or didn't get that 2-point conversion. So instead of waiting to the end of the game, and let's say you got 15 seconds left when you score that last touchdown, and you go for 2 and you miss it, well, now you don't have any time to actually fix the miss. By doing it with 4 minutes left, you now have time to fix it and change your strategy and try to get. So he knows on that last drive he's got to heave it into the end zone because he already missed the 2-point conversions, as opposed to being in a situation where maybe you don't know. And I mean, anybody who watched the Buccaneers game this weekend, right? They're down by 8, they drive down the field, they score with like 10 seconds left, and then they miss the 2-point conversion, game's over. And that's the thing he was avoiding potentially happening by going for 2 there early on, because he had already made the decision that if they were down by 1 and had to go for a 2-point conversion, he was going to do it. So he's like, well, why don't I do it when I'm down by 11? And then I have that bit of information to start with. The other thing is that you can't do this stuff halfway. And I think that's the thing that people need to get into their minds when they think about analytics in general. So and I think one of the things that's come up a lot is, well, Napier knew he had to keep Tennessee off the field. He knew that he needed to keep the offense on. That was one of the things he talked about in the press conference today for going for it on 4th down that entire time, the 6 times that he went for it. And all of that is true, and that factors into the math and factors into the decisions that you're going to make. But the reality is if you're going to make these decisions on 4th down here, because they increase your chances of winning, then they're going to increase your chances of winning against LSU 3 weeks from now. They're going to increase your chances of winning against Georgia. They're going to increase your chances of winning against Florida State. And the only way that you end up at not increasing your chances of winning is if you pick and choose when you do it. Because picking and choosing when you do it means you're not actually playing the statistics. It's like it really is a process over results thing. If you start making decisions based on the result, well, the next time you do it, like if half the time you stick to your strategy, was it really a strategy overall? And so one of the things that makes me really happy about Napier coming out of this one is that he basically said, yeah, I did it, and I do it again. And one of the things that actually earlier this year, I think maybe it was already the end for Scott Frost, but he kicked an onside kick against in the opener against Northwestern, right? And if it was statistically right to do that, and I actually think it is, then he needed to stand behind that. Say, yeah, I'd do it again. The result wasn't good, but what we're going to do is we're going to do the right thing every time, because we're going to win these one-score games by doing the right thing every time. And he didn't do that. He got up there and he said, well, if I saw the result, if I had to do it over again, I'd change it. Napier didn't do that. Napier got up and said, we're not going to make decisions based on feelings. We're not going to make decisions based on emotions. We have a plan. The plan was this. We executed this plan. I'm comfortable with the way we evaluated that plan coming in. I'm comfortable that the reasons to make those decisions didn't change throughout the course of the game. Like, for example, if Hendon Hooker had gone down with a shoulder injury in the third quarter, then maybe you play for overtime, because that completely flips who has the advantage in an overtime, right? But nothing had changed from the pregame going in. And so he stuck to his guns. He stuck to what he thinks is the right way to do things. And that's what you want in a coach from an in-game management perspective. You want somebody who's going to look at it and say, this is what I plan to do. I'm going to stick to it because the numbers say that this makes the most sense. And so I love it. I love it. Dropping true facts, I'll take that any day of the week, man.
Yeah, I mean, and like you said, opponent's going to come into play. Home, away is going to come into play of like how aggressive you are in some of these decisions. So it's not going to be blanket each and every time. He's going to take into a factor who you play, maybe even the other team's chances of them winning. If you are the home team, everything kind of switches right there. But yeah, there's. Look, he laid it out of the even research done beforehand. If you're a double-digit underdog and you're going on the road, this is what you have to do to go win the game, not go to overtime, but to go win the game. And maybe overtime is in the equation in further down the road in some form or fashion, but not in this particular game. Against the Tennessee Volunteers on Saturday. This was the analytic plan to go, to take forward and go win a ball game.
Well, and hopefully 3 years from now, we don't have to worry about this.
Yeah.
So the hope is, and I would say one of the things that I think Saban has actually failed in some capacity is this very thing when he's wound up in situations where he might have been able to take advantage of it. I think he's been more conservative than maybe he should have been. Now, he's always had a great defense and he's always relied on his defense and those sorts of things. But I think there are games where you can look back where Alabama's lost, where he has not taken advantage of this sort of stuff. A lot of his wins are 45-3, right? And look, that has a lot to do with how good a coach he is. That has a lot to do with how good a developer of talent he is. That has a lot to do with how good of a recruiter he is. And all those things put together means he's got a much larger margin of error on game day and can mess up a few of these things and still get through. I mean, look, I think until last year, Kirby Smart was somebody who you looked at and said he does not make the analytically smart decision every time out there to give his Georgia teams the best chance to win. Obviously, they were able to overcome that last year, though still I consider them SEC runner-ups. But irrespective of that, like, you have to have that level of talent to overcome it. Otherwise, you got to find every little edge. And what Napier did, so I did, there's a college football fourth down bot on Twitter that tells you whether, like, how much winning percentage you've added. And all the fourth down decisions Napier made, only one moved in the wrong direction. That was the missed field goal. That was a decision that I think you could quibble with and say maybe you should have gone for it, though it was one where they said, essentially, it's a push. But he added 13% of winning potential to Florida's ledger just by the fourth down decisions that he made. And so if you figure this was like a 75-25 in Tennessee's advantage, and really when you're talking about a 2-score favorite, that's kind of what you're saying is 3 out of 4 times you kind of expect Tennessee to win. That 13% swung it way back towards Florida. The 2-point conversion, if he'd have gotten the first one to shorter, okay, that swings it back towards Florida. And can you imagine how psychotic the Tennessee fans would have been going if they were up by 2 when that onside kick gets snagged by DeJuan Black? Like, and this, I think, is the analytics argument that if you would have been singing Napier's praises if they'd gotten that first 2-point conversion and were down by 2 when DeJuan Black gets the onside kick, then you can't kick him for them being down 5 when DeJuan Black gets the onside kick, because what you're doing is you're saying, well, I don't like the result, so the decision is poor. Mm-hmm. But if you liked the result, you would say it was a good decision. That's not the way this works. Like, we work in a world where you don't know that as the head coach going in. You don't know what the result will be. You only know what the odds will be if you win, or if your decision turns out, and if your decision doesn't turn out. And Napier took a look at it and said, I think this is what I need to do to win this game. Tennessee was a better team. I don't think there's any doubt when you look at all the statistics coming in, when you look at the statistics of the two teams coming out of this game. Tennessee wins this game 65% of the time with the same statistical profile for the game. Florida was fortunate to be in it and gets that fourth down turnover, heads the other direction, gets that second touchdown. All of a sudden, you're like, whoa, this is pretty close. But how often do you get an onside kick? All those different things that had to go right. And the 2-point conversion was just one thing in the sequence of events that did not go right. And once you've missed the first one, obviously you have to go for the second one. And so, again, I don't think anybody's debating the second one. They're just looking at the end going, wow, it would have been nice to be down by 3. And it's like, yeah, but would have been nice to be down by 2 too. Again, I want a coach who makes decisions based on math. What I want is a coach who makes decisions based on what he's planned. So whether he had a conservative game plan coming into this one and then stayed conservative the whole game, whether he had an aggressive game plan and stayed aggressive the entire game, irrespective of what he did, I very much respect that he stuck to his guns the entire game and was able to and made those decisions when the bullets were flying and said, I'm going to stick with what I know is right when the bullets are flying. And if there are criticisms that I had of Mullen, especially last year, it was that the timeout usage and the other things that they did tended to not be consistent with what you thought might be necessary or even what happened earlier in the game or later in the game. And it doesn't look like that's going to be the case with Billy Napier.
Yep. I know everybody was questioning it as it was happening. And I think initially a lot of us did. But then you do hear the explanation, and then all the analytics started kind of coming out late Saturday night and on Sunday too to kind of defend it. Doesn't mean you have to agree with it. I'm not telling you to agree with it. I'm just letting you know why Billy Napier believes in it so much and the analytics out there. So
I'm telling you to agree with it.
There you go.
In this case, there's a right answer and a wrong answer, and the right answer is that, man, I wish that ball hadn't been tipped on the way to shorter. But if the result changes your approach, then you're going to struggle long term. And certainly you look at results and change tactics and things like that if the results work out long term. But I mean, Napier, he said it himself. I mean, he's quoting studies about teams down by 2 or teams that are two score underdogs on the road and how often they win in overtime that colors his decision-making process. And so what have we, when we're sitting there going, he should have taken the extra point, we're basically saying, do what every other coach does so that you don't get criticized. And Napier said, screw it. I'm going to get criticized because I want to win. And, nobody criticizes. I think you actually said it today. I think you tweeted that nobody seemed to criticize Lane Kiffin for going forward on fourth down all the time and being ultra aggressive when he was at Ole Miss or as he's been at Ole Miss. And so I think, this is the new generation of coaches. They're going to look at this stuff. They're going to look at stuff and do the things that are correct from a statistical perspective over the long haul. Now, the problem is, and this is why we talk about one-score games being 50-50 propositions. The problem is it doesn't always work out. Right? Just because you go for it on fourth down and 1 and you make that 80% of the time doesn't mean that you're not the 20% who gets stuffed.
Yep.
And so I think a couple of things you can do is probably quibble with play calls. You can quibble with, the opening one where they just sort of ran Richardson off tackle and you go, all right, is that really the best play you got? But then you look at all the other ones they ran on fourth down. I mean, to have the stones to throw that ball deep to shorter on 4th and 2 from your own territory, it's like, woo. Like
when that pass has really not been there all year.
Yeah, well, usually it's been 3 or 4 yards past him.
Right.
So again, it was a dime, right? I mean, Richardson threw a dime. He trusted him to do it. He did it. And again, I think Napier's sitting there going, well, geez, we can't stop him anyway. So whether we give it to him at our own 20 or whether we give it to him at their 20, it doesn't really matter. It's going to turn into a touchdown. So what do I have to lose? And that factors into the equation too.
Yeah, and speaking of equation, and look, we'll end it on this, but we're a Stars Matter group here too, and it's like when you go and recruit 5 stars and 5 stars and 5 stars and highly rated 4 stars, and you have a top 5 class, and you don't win a national championship. Well, yeah, see there, it doesn't work, Well, no, just because you didn't win with the 5 stars and 4 stars does not mean that's not the best path to go get a national championship. So, you look at it from a numbers perspective, and just because it does not work out, you still go with it.
Well, it's funny because we started this episode talking about glass half full, glass half empty from this game. Certainly the loss is the glass half empty side of it, where you say, God, it would have been really nice to get a win. Boy, would it have been nice to just stick that knife in the Tennessee fans' back one more time and twist it, especially with a comeback like that would have been, right? At the same time, what this says, and I don't think we should overlook this. What this says is that when Billy Napier says process, he means it. And so everyone who's been looking at it and going, well, Mullen wasn't he was great X's and O's, but he wasn't a good recruiter, and the program wasn't really set up from a process perspective to bring in recruits. When everyone looks at McElwain and says sort of the same thing, that he was, there's been some talk about Muschamp and McElwain being Saban clones, and Napier's sort of the same guy. Napier's not the same guy. These guys did not do this. Right. These guys did not sit there and look and say, I have a process. I believe in it. I'm sticking to it because I think it's the right thing to do. Now, look, if you don't agree with Napier's process, then let's have an argument about the process and the numbers and that sort of stuff. And look, you might be right. Maybe we can have that discussion. I still think some of those fourth downs he went for against Kentucky, given the flow of the game and given some of these things that you see with the win probability added, probably the second one especially, not necessarily the right decision. But he has a process for making these decisions. And the fact that he follows that, is music to my ears in terms of what you have to do to build a sustainable program. And so, look, they're 2-2. There's no sugarcoating it. I mean, you'd much rather be 3-1, 4-0. And after the Utah game, we were certainly thinking that might be where we could be. And so I get that people are disappointed. But if there's one thing I'm taking from this Tennessee game, it's that we have a coach who understands process. We have a coach who's going to stick to process. And so what'll happen is if the recruits aren't highly rated enough, and if the result on the field isn't good enough, and if we don't see defensive breakdowns end, it won't be because he wasn't thorough. It'll be because he's not able to actually do the job, that his process doesn't work. And there will be no doubt that you need to say, all right, it's time to move on to somebody new. But I this game, more than any other game so far, gives me confidence in Billy Napier and the Billy Napier era. And that's something that I'm taking from this game, certainly.
Sounds good, Will. So Eastern Washington on the horizon here. Partly because of the hurricane coming, and I got to work news coverage there. So not much of a preview. There wasn't going to be much of a Eastern Washington preview anyway. So we'll see what's coming up this week on Gators Breakdown. The schedule's kind of in flux the next few days. But what you guys got coming up at Read and Reaction?
Yeah, so it's obviously the first trimester's over. I think we're gonna have a review. Nick and I will sort of go back and forth on an article that talks about the first 4 games and what we think that means for the program. No Eastern Washington preview. There'll be a pick, but no preview. I am going to take a closer look at the defense. I think it's important to take a look and say, what do we want to see? What does Florida do? We talked about the identity. What do we think the identity should be? And then again, if we're talking about process, what's the process as that identity gets forged? And so what should you be looking for? Or what do I think that Billy Napier should be doing with that defense as things move forward the next couple of weeks? So those will be the 2 things I think that'll be up there this week.
There we go. Readreaction.com. You can follow Will on Twitter as well at Will Miles SCC. That'll do it for this episode of Gators Breakdown. I am your host, David Waters. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. Guys and girls out there, thank you for listening to this episode of Gators Breakdown.